Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/380, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 380th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. In this edition, it is the patented Takeaways and Future Adventures episode. I guess it's not really patented. I've never done the second part before. But this is the sort of final chapter of this chapter. Can I do that? The final chapter of the build, really, of the eBike project. So we know the eBike works. My confidence is up. What were the takeaways from the Shakedown ride? And perhaps more importantly, what are the kinds of rides I'm looking and considering for in 2025 and beyond on this wonderful little electric wonder? So let's get into all of that. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. As I mentioned last week, we have got the live show, which I'm going to pester and annoy you with for the next several weeks. It is Friday, December 6th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Topics are TBA. It's going to be the podcast the next week if you can't join us, but definitely join us. It's a lot of fun. We do some Q&As. We do fun stuff. It's chicanery and nonsense. And of course, we've got the live room chat, which is a lot of fun. That's all going to be details at pedalshift.net/live. Hope you can join us on the 6th, or I guess it would be the 7th for you in Australia. You know who you are. All right. We also have, as a part of the housekeeping section here, we're talking about the ride, of course, that's in the rearview mirror, but I've got a brand new adventure lined up, which I've been sort of sneakily telling you about, but I haven't given you any real details on. Preview episode is going to be next week, but a little bit of fun info for you right here. This is going to be an adventure in a state that I have literally never been to. So a brand new to me state, my 49th. Some of you have listened in the past may know what this could be, or at least you have it narrowed down to 2, but I'm super excited for this. It is a unique adventure. It is bicycle adjacent, and it will include bicycling. And I'm not going to tell you anymore because the preview episode is next week. So stick around for that, or come back, or whatever it is. I don't know when you're listening to this. Maybe it already happened. Who knows? But preview episode, Pedal Shift 381, coming at you next week. All right. Let's talk about the trip that I already did, which was the Shakedown trip with the e-bike. I have a bunch of takeaways from that trip, and I also have some thoughts on the future with this bike. It is currently sitting behind me on my porch here in West Virginia. It is likely going to primarily live out here for a couple of reasons. Number one, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, the nature of being able to position this bike for trips is a little more challenging. And the other thing is that I think e-bikes are a little bit more in the realm of a theft magnet as far as bikes go. And in my condo complex in DC, we have had a couple of bike thefts recently. Not mine, but we have had them. And so I am a little bit more nervous about bringing this bike out because it's probably not my most expensive bike. That's probably the Brompton, but it's my next most expensive bike. A lot of that, of course, has to do with the battery. The battery is a large chunk of that, and it probably would not be attached to the bike, even though I can lock it to there. But there's a whole bunch of different reasons why I think it's going to end up living out here, except when I do some swaps for future rides, which will be later on the show. Okay, so that's some basics here. Here's some takeaways. First of all, the bike works, and I think it works pretty stunningly well so far. I mean, I am under no illusion that it is perfect. I think that the biggest potential fail point on it at this point is the chain, I think. And I just purchased a brand new chain. I am going to be installing it soon, maybe even as soon as this weekend. And I think I'm going to have it be full length. I'm not going to take any of the links out because, as I talked about, I can't get into the lowest gear with the chain at this particular length. I think it's a length problem. So I'm going to see what happens with a longer chain going on this and just see what happens. See if that ends up working. It may be that it's too long and that creates other problems as well. And I use all of this, I say all of this because I think I may be a better bike mechanic than I originally thought, which is not hard because I never have considered myself any kind of a bike mechanic at all. I've largely outsourced that to actual professionals, which is probably a good idea. And I will continue to do that. But I think I'm starting to get a little bit more confidence in what is in the realm of possible. My confidence needs to be tested for a few other things, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But for things like putting on chains and indexing gears, although I don't think I'm very good at the latter, I'm getting more of a hang of it. And I think that that's something that I haven't done for the last 10 plus years, 12 years since I've really gotten back into cycling. And so that's what I really like about the e-bike is that it's really pushing me into places that are past my comfort zone, which I think is good for growth. So that's the first takeaway. It works. It's minimum viable e-bike, and I may be a better mechanic than I thought, which means that I'm not creating death traps so far. Next takeaway, I may have underestimated the range on this battery. I thought that it was entirely possible that this battery, as enormous as it is, it's a 20 amp hour battery, that it was going to not fit my needs for the type of cycling that I want to do. And I think that is clearly wrong based on two things that I've noticed on this particular trip. Number one, I was able to get back here with a not fully charged battery, and I did not do any kind of power limiting or anything like that. I rode as fast and as hard as I wanted to, using as much battery as I wanted to. And I did 20 miles, mostly uphill and going fast. And I only went down from about probably 90% to 65%. That's pretty great. The other thing is that when I was using it on the C&O, and granted, this was a very small sample size, I didn't want to go higher than assist level 2, which is only using 20% of the motor's total power. And so that tells me that I can battery manage on a trail like the C&O and go as fast as I want. I was going somewhere between 15 and 18 miles per hour. I believe that's right on the cusp of what the speed limit is. I believe the speed limit on the trail is 15, and I will double check that because I don't want to exceed that in a way that is annoying or outside of the boundaries. But, I do want to be able to do a higher speed when using this bike within limits and when safe. I think I would only go that speed when there are literally no other folks around. When I'm in areas, and I know this trail pretty well, that I'm going to be expecting to see people, or there's going to be more congestion from other bikes and other pedestrians, especially, I'm not going to be going that fast. I may even not use the e-assist in those sections. In fact, I probably won't, just because this bike can certainly do just fine without it. So combine all of those things together, I think that the range on this battery may be able to do full days on the C&O. I don't want to say easily, but with some degree of certainty. And that is really interesting and exciting for the types of things that I can do with this bike, and more on that for future rides. All right, so other takeaway. I may have underestimated the recharging capabilities of the slow charger, but maybe not. So why am I being cagey on this? I was surprised at how much juice I was able to get back into the battery on following the downhill slope of day one. Yeah, I was charging for, I think, over an hour, but I was able to put back in a measurable amount of the energy that I used for the ride downhill. Now, is that a lot? No, but I will say I probably went up from about 75 to 90%, give or take, in that time. And I'm estimating here, as you heard in that episode, I'm still unclear about the metrics on measuring discharge of this battery. Although I think that what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use the percentage ratings, because that seems to not work very well for this display. I'm going to utilize the volts, the battery, and that you can convert much more easily. And I'll get the hang of that, and we'll be able to share that with you a little bit more, because that seemed like it was measuring that in a more capable way. But I think that the replacement of electrons in my little battery there, well, not my little battery, but my e-bike battery, is something that I can do even with this 3-amp charger. It's not Biking Brian style. I would prefer to be able to do it at a higher rate when on tours. But when I don't really need to replace huge swaths of charge and a battery, 3 amps is perfectly fine. In fact, I don't really want to go any higher than that for regular normal charging. So I may have underestimated what I can do with longer breaks. It really might be able to replace a reasonable amount of miles on this particular battery for this particular bike under certain conditions, because of course, as we know, different conditions are going to drain that battery more. So that's good. The underestimates are really good news based on the Shakedown ride. Another takeaway, I need more hand positions for this bike. I thought that the Ergon grips were going to be, or the Ergon style grips, the German ones that I have, I thought that those were going to be enough, because I thought, oh, on my Brompton, they're enough. But on my Brompton, I think I'm underestimating how much I use the horns on the Ergon grips that I have on there. I clearly use them a lot, because I found even after about 20 miles, that I was getting some hand fatigue. So I need more. And that's going to be, I've got lots of different options. I can stick with this particular handlebar set and just get some horns. And that's inexpensive. That's 10 or 20 bucks. Or I can do what I think I might do, and that is go for a Jones bar or some other type of more comfort style bar. It will lift up my riding profile, which I think I would like to do a little bit more. B, it gives me more cockpit space, so I can be one of those annoying e-bikers with a billion things on my cockpit, which I'm sort of excited to do in some ways. But also, I just think that it is the thing that might complete this bike. I don't know if I'm going to go with a Jones bar. And if you don't know what that is, it's this large curving upright style bike that you see, or bike handlebar that you see on a ton of different, especially touring bikes. And I know Mysterious James has a Jones bar on one of his bikes, maybe even more than one, but he'll have to remind me. But I think that they look like the right choice for this particular bike. They also make other brands of similar style, kind of sweeping handlebars. The one thing that I'll say is I don't think I like really wide. I don't like going outside of my shoulder width, I think. So that's what's making me reconsider whether a Jones bar is right for me. So I don't know. I've got more thought to put into all of that. It's a bit of an investment. They can run up to a couple $100, but more importantly, what I do with the handlebars is going to impact some other things down the line, which is that the next thing? Oh yeah, it's the next thing. I really should finish this bike. I got some stuff I need to do, as we've been talking about here, but many of those things involve cutting cables. To put on the gear shift sensor, I've got to cut cables. And if I'm going to cut cables, I think I should figure out this whole cockpit situation first, because right now, as I've mentioned, with my stem extender and everything with this current handlebar setup, I'm stretched pretty thin. I can't do much more where it would lift the handlebars up anymore, or the components on the handlebars, more importantly, the brakes, the shifters, things like that. So I think I need to figure out what I'm going to do before I make any choices where I've got to cut the cables. And the shift sensor is something where I need to get it on there. I need to cut cables for that. I may as well do this all at once. So that's why I'm sort of combining these two takeaways. I got to figure out what I want. And I've been a little bit hesitant on that because these are larger decisions, and they're decisions on things that I've never really ridden on. And as I talked about before, I'm not sure if the Jones bar setup is right for me. I got to figure some things out. you will be the first to know. All of you will be the first. Well, maybe not the first to know. The people that I order from will probably be the first to know. But you will be very high up on the list in terms of who will know about all of this, because it's going to alter the look of the bike as well. One other thing that I should mention is I'm also thinking about changing the look of the bike too. I've mentioned, I think in that ginormous build session that you were all forced to listen to, that I may do something with. I love the color. I love the kind of matte gray. I don't love the Ozark Trail on the side of it. And maybe I'll stick with it. Maybe I won't. But I'm toying with some things to kind of change that as well. And that would all come probably at the same time. I think I've got a big finishing session to this build, or at least, the finish to Mark 1 of this build, where we're still in the beta and we're going to get to Mark 1. So we'll figure that all out. But I got to figure it out. I got to finish the bike. I got to cut cables. I got to get the confidence to do that. I have all the stuff for it, as I've mentioned, and I'm sure it's going to be fine, but I'll watch a bunch more YouTube videos and kind of dither on it before I do it, but it's going to happen. I've got to buy a whole bunch of other things as well, because I think I've decided, as I mentioned before, I was like, oh, do I just borrow components to my other bike when I decide to go and ride on this one? And as you listened and heard, I forgot to bring certain things for the Shakedown ride because I didn't take them off my other bike. So I didn't have my handlebar roll. I didn't do a whole bunch of things that I think would have made it better. And so I think that rather than forget things, I think I'm just going to stick a crowbar in the wallet and get the final things, get the straps that I need, get all of the components so that this bike has a complete setup from the jump. I think that's just the way to go on all of this. And I don't want to borrow from my other bikes. And that's kind of another thing, and this will be a bit of a transition into the future. I am really, really into this bike. I really, once you start riding on an e-bike and doing some kind of an adventure on an e-bike, you're all of a sudden you're sort of like, oh, wow, I want to ride this all the time. And I want to stop myself from doing that, because I do want to still ride the acoustic bikes. I still want to ride the Brompton. In fact, I know I'm going to be riding the Brompton. I've got an adventure already lined up that is Brompton specific, several of them, in fact. And so I don't want you all to think that this is going to become now an e-bike adventure channel solely. It's going to be a component for sure going forward, because it opens up a lot of different interesting things. It's fun to be able to ride much faster and with half the effort. It's fun to do that, but it's not going to be the only thing, because I want to be able to do all the other bikes. The other bikes exist for a reason. And, a lot of that gets into the downside of this bike, which I'm going to be talking about in the future section here in a moment. But each of my bikes, and I now effectively have 3. We've got the Goblin that just sits there and taunts me, but it's kind of my trainer now. But the 3 bikes fit different needs for different types of rides, and I'm very clear on what each of those bikes can do and when each bike is the right bike for certain types of rides. And we'll talk about that in the future section here in a moment. But yeah, this is not going to become solely an e-bike channel, even though it's taken up many episodes of 2024, and it will probably take up a few episodes, at least of 2025, at least 1 or 2 adventures. But just know that if you're not into the whole e-bike thing, this is not going to exclusively be an e-bike channel. I'm excited for it, but it's not going to dominate everything. All right, let's talk about the future. That's a good segue, I suppose. I am going to give a minor preview to a 2025 ride, but it's a 2025 ride that I think most of you already know I'm going to do anyways. Spoiler alert, I'm going to Florida in the winter in 2025, and I will spoil it a little bit. This is a preview episode spoiler. I'm not going to take the e-bike with me, but I considered it. I really did. In fact, I started buying travel accommodations for all of that. But I ended up deciding not doing it because it ended up being a bit of a pain, and it ended up being a ride I decided I didn't want to do. Although I really would like to bring the e-bike for the ride that I'm going to do, just the beginning and ends of it were a hassle. And That's the thing about this bike that is a little frustrating. And that gets to the point about positioning an e-bike, any e-bike, when you're going to go for a ride that doesn't start or end where your e-bike resides. So the Shakedown ride, it started and ended here at the cabin. It is perfect for those types of things. There are all sorts of rides that I can do and will be doing where the e-bike starts and ends in the same place. But positioning the ride is complex because transportation has to be by ground or through a qualified shipper. And the qualified shippers, at least the one that I've done the research on, it's Bike Flights, who I've worked with before, and I've liked them, and I know many of you have used them. This is not sponsored, but they do e-bikes, but they have very specific rules. If you're going to ship a battery, you've got to ship your whole e-bike with it. And that's great. That's going to be handy potentially for future rides. But everything else has got to be by ground. They'll do it by ground as well, because when you're shipping a battery of any kind of size that is useful for an e-bike, it has got to be done by ground shipping and in a very particular way. And you've got to declare it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing that I was surprised about is, yes, I got my e-bike battery shipped to me by, I can't remember, UPS, FedEx, I can't remember, but it was a ground shipment. It came right to my door. But I cannot, as an individual, use those very same ground shipping services and ship a battery just willy-nilly. You actually have to have a special certification for that. That's my understanding. So the idea of, hey, I can just fly out to Oregon with my bike and then use UPS or FedEx and ship my batteries back and forth, and that's it. That's not really possible in the here and now at the, middle end of 2024. That may change. Bike shipping services, yes, possible. But otherwise, it's kind of a pain to position. I'm used to being able to hop on a plane and bring my bike, and my bike is there, and I can even ride from the airport. I'm also used to all sorts of different things with that kind of a movement. But I can do it by train. I can do it by motor vehicle, maybe by bus. It depends on the buses. But buses now are kind of in flux as well to be able to do all of that. I think that utilizing local transit is going to be a bit of a challenge on this bike because these tires are wider, and some of those front racks may not be able to accommodate it. I'm unsure if Amtrak can accommodate these because the hooks on some of the Amtraks may not be able to accommodate. It's very close. It'll be very interesting to see. So positioning this bike for adventures is going to be a bit more challenging. I've got a few ideas that aren't new, but they are less than awesome. They're not my preferred ways of doing things, but positioning is going to be a challenge for some of the rides. And I've got ideas for rides, which of course I'm going to be sharing with you later on here. I want to do more shakedowns before going over the wall, as MJ and I often speak of, because I think while I've grown in confidence with this bike, I also know that for the big kind of trips that I'm considering, that if things go sideways with an e-bike, they tend to go sideways a little bit harder. It does mean you have to be a little bit more prepared, a little bit more self-sufficient. I think that that's fine. As I mentioned before, I'll be carrying a spare chain with me 100% for every single e-bike ride. It's very inexpensive insurance, quite frankly, because it feels like that's the number one fail point outside of maybe running out of battery range. So I want to be able to continue to build confidence going on longer shakedown rides and just kind of getting more and more confident with how all those things go. So here is sort of my timeline. And I'm not sure if all of these rides are going to happen in this particular order. I'm not even sure if I'm going to do all of these rides, but this is sort of what I'm thinking about in terms of the future with this bike. The first one is I've done an overnight on the C&O where it's just an out and back kind of a thing. I think that it makes sense for me to do a longer ride on the C&O, and that the one that's kind of coming up in my brain and I might be able to fit in, maybe possibly before the end of this year, would be doing the same thing, going down to Hancock, and then just continuing out west and going out to Cumberland, and then either riding back the next day or taking the train back. The train may be interesting because, as I mentioned before, how does this all work? Will my bike fit on the hooks, et cetera, et cetera? So that's an interesting one. My understanding is that Amtrak is okay with e-bikes, so I think that that's good. Open question on other elements to this. I've seen a lot of fat bikes end up on Amtrak trains, so I think that if it doesn't fit on the hook, they would just lay it down in that baggage car, which they frankly do most of the time anyways, or many of the times. So that's something that I am definitely thinking about doing. I think that's the next trip with this bike. And I think that it's going to be a really interesting thing to test out the range on the battery, quite frankly. Yes, I've got a recharge spot in Hancock, so I can maybe go down, maybe do a night there and then continue the way out, or charge up for an hour or do something like that. But it's going to be really interesting. How much range at level 2 do I have? I think that's going to be a really fun, interesting ride to do. So that's on that confidence level on me doing that is about 100%. I'm looking forward to doing that. And the fall, of course, is an amazing time to do it. Open question of, do I have time? We'll see. The next one that's on the list, and this is certainly going to happen, I just don't know when, is a full Gapco ride with this. What I haven't done is any research on recharge capabilities on my normal kind of TikTok of stops. Also, my normal TikTok of stops has been shattered with Husky Haven no longer existing anymore. Yes, I have not ridden the C&O in that part of the C&O since Husky Haven went away, and I'm just devastated by that. So we're going to have to figure that out, because I will need to figure out recharge spots, and they've got to be overnight recharge spots. So I think I might have to deviate from the trails and maybe find commercial campgrounds where I can plug in overnight, or B&Bs or hotels or things like that. So that's something that's going to change the nature of the trip, I think, a little bit as well. The next ones on the list are a little more, I don't want to say hypothetical, but we'll say hypothetical. These are ones that I've got an eye on, and I think would be also really good for, we're kind of behind, we've left shakedown rides behind us, and now we're doing actual bicycle adventures. And looking at this from the prospect of positioning being a challenge. So the first one on that list is the East Coast Greenway, and doing segments starting in DC, going north or south from DC, and figuring it out from there. I don't know how many days, how far, whatever, but I think that those might be kind of hotel-based trips, maybe, or commercial campgrounds, or campgrounds with electricity kind of a thing, but going either north towards Baltimore and from there, or going south. And I don't know what direction we'd be going through Fredericksburg, and down maybe to Richmond and beyond there. That's some interesting stuff. Those are rides that I've really always wanted to do, but haven't. So East Coast Greenway segments out of DC, and then figuring out how to get back. Maybe it's a loop. Maybe it is something else. One thing that I've been looking at, let me save it for the next one. The next one is one that I'm really, honestly, this might be the reason why I got the e-bike. This is the ride that I think that's part of a grander plan. I've talked about it before, and this one is connecting the Ohio to Erie Trail with the Katy Trail, and that's effectively Dayton-ish, Ohio, to St. Louis-ish, really more St. Charles, Missouri. And why do I want to do that? Well, that would give me contiguous wheels down from DC all the way to Kansas City, because I have ridden the length of all of these places, including Ohio to Erie Trail, Gapco, and all the way down the Katy as well. So that's kind of intriguing, right? Because I've talked about doing this cross-country ride in segments. That suddenly does a big connector right there. Positioning the e-bike is the real question mark right there. And there's trains and there's ways to do it. And I could get to Cincinnati at 1 a.m. and Amtrak is just really frustrating with its schedule in that part of the country. And then I was like, oh, I wonder if I could rent a car, because that is a mysterious James hack right there. He is the king of the one-way car rentals. And it was cheaper and easier. And oh my goodness, going from DCA airport to the Dayton airport, one-way car rental was cheaper than the Amtrak. And obviously on my own schedule. And. So that's, I think, going to be maybe some secret sauce for the positioning conundrums in a few different places. Now, of course, that was small sample size. That was just picking a random date, but that might be the type of thing that can get me from one place to the other and then maybe take the train back. I would strongly prefer not to rent a car every single time I want to position the e-bike, but I do know that here in the States, it is often the easiest and cheapest way to go, even though it's not my number one preferred way to do it, because it's a lot of driving. It's it's logistics that I tend not to like that much, but it's there. And that certainly would be a way to get me to a lesser served place in Ohio to get to at least a more served place in St. Louis. So that is on the list. What are the odds of that happening in 2025? I don't know, man. That looks pretty good to me as a spring ride or a fall ride. That looks pretty good to me. So that's on the list. Then we start getting into okay, if I've done that, then what's next on the list? Well, Kansas City to Denver. That's another one right on the list. And then once we do that, Denver to the Pacific Coast. Could I do all of these together? Yeah, maybe. Depends if I can kind of string together the time to do it. I think next year is less likely because I've got one big international trip that is not bicycling related. That is going to eat up potentially 2 weeks of my life. And it's going to be fun. I'm going to Japan. I'm excited about it. No, I'm not bringing my bike. I'm sorry. Yes, there's lots of great cycling there, but I'm going to be doing some other things. So yeah. So next year is a little more hampered by non-cycling adventures for me. So I think that the odds of me doing a segment on the cross-country segmentation thing, reasonably high. Doing all of them is very unlikely, I think. But that's kind of what I'm thinking about. That is the e-bike adventures of the future. Are there other ones? Oh, absolutely. There definitely are. And there's one on my list here that I'm specifically not talking about because it's actually going to be in an upcoming episode for my big adventure that I will talk about later in a future episode. That the e-bike might be very interesting in that part of the country, but it's not going to be coming with me on this one. What are you interested in hearing about? I think that there's a lot of potential US-based adventures that I can take this bike on. I'm curious if there's anything that you're interested in. One other thing that I want to mention here, I am often averse to hot weather rides because I just get deactivated in the sun. It's hard on me. It's hard on my body. I sweat a lot. I'm uncomfortable in the heat. I think with an e-bike, I think that opens things up a little bit more for me. I can get geared up so that the sun doesn't impact me as much. And if I can use these in places for rides that I've typically said no to before, that's also really interesting to me. So what are you interested in? This, I think, opens up a lot of riding in places that may have been closed to me because I just wasn't interested in it. I wasn't interested in putting myself through it. But with an e-bike, maybe I would. And there's some really cool places that I would have said no to or would have been less excited about that now, man, I'm a little more excited about. So I'm curious what you're interested in because who knows, that could influence a future ride for me. So that is it. That is a lot of me chattering about my takeaways, about my future potential adventures. This is a fun bike. This is a work in progress. We're at the end of the beta, or end-ish of the beta, and Mark 1 is about ready to be assembled when I finally get my head screwed on straight this winter and get it all figured out. There may be another Shakedown ride that you hear about. We'll see. I hope so. And I'm just excited about what this brings to the future of this podcast and the future for me personally of my bicycle adventures, because I now know that I'm going to be able to cycle really well into my elderly years. I'm nowhere near my elderly years, but the fact that e-biking excites me and intrigues me. This reminds me of the gentleman that I ran into. He was in his mid 70s or maybe even a little bit older on the Erie Canal towpath. I think I've mentioned this before. And that dude seemed so happy because he was still able to bike the way that he wanted to bike. And now that I've got a bike like this, I can be that dude in 20 or 30 years. And that's super exciting for me as someone who really wants that and wants that in their life. So, yay, e-bike.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Kropke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullum, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.